Lol, my bad. I guess I'll restart. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Detroit Lions live stream. We went over day one of free agency, but we have not gone over day two or some of the more recent signings and losses that we experienced as a football team. So today, just wanted to sit down, get your guys' opinion, give out my opinion, and talk about all the moves, the additions, the re signings, and the losses that this team has endured over the last days since we talked last. So today I'm going to start off with the re-signing of the free agents. We talked about Isaiah Buggs, we talked about Craig Reynolds, but as soon as we ended the live stream on Monday, we did have another re-signing as Alex Anzalone signed a 3-year, $18.75 million deal. And there was a lot of controversy around this one. There was a lot of concern about the Lions overpaying. There was a lot of people that weren't happy with the signing overall, and just in general, a lot of mixed opinions and emotions in regards to this signing. But I think it's a very good signing. Alex Anzalone was a great linebacker for the Detroit Lions last year, had over 125 tackles, 5 passes defended, an interception, forced fumbles, fumble recoveries, TFLs, sacks. I mean, he was really good at just about everything the Lions asked him to do, and they asked him to do a lot. He's a leader on the defense. He is somebody that makes plays on the defense. He commands the defense. He organizes the defense. He is one of the most impactful players on the Detroit Lions defensive side of the football. And he is re-signed for $6.25 million a year. Now, that might seem like a lot of money to put into your linebacking core, and I don't disagree. I think that that is a decent contract and a decent amount of value to give out to a position that isn't super valuable, and a position where Brad Holmes has shown that he has the ability to go out and draft and find playmakers and find people that can fill roles in the later rounds of the NFL draft. But I think Alex Anzalone was the right signing. He is a leader. He is a captain. He gets the defense organized. He makes plays. He improved significantly from year one to year two. And just overall, I think that this was the correct signing, especially when you look around the league and you have guys like Jermaine Pratt getting $7 million. You have guys like Tremaine Edmonds making $17 million with the Chicago Bears. Alex Anzalone is a good value deal. He's a good player, a good playmaker. And it's not so much that the Lions can't upgrade at the linebacker position. It's not so much that they're not going to draft another player, but at this point, Alex Anzalone is a good player, and you guarantee yourself that you're not going to move backwards while returning a player that was really good for you a year ago. Now, Matt Nelson is the second player to sign to the Detroit Lions to get re-signed. Matt Nelson being a rotational and depth offensive tackle, played a little bit at the tight end position as just a blocker. I think this is a good move for the Detroit Lions. They did a good job last year with the offensive line in the run blocking categories and just overall having one of the best offensive lines in all of football. I think bringing back a depth piece, a piece that's familiar with the offense and familiar with the chemistry around the offensive line makes a lot of sense. It doesn't have the years or the money, but I would assume it isn't anything too astronomical. Will Harris is returning on a 1-year, $2.53 million deal, fully guaranteed. This is one of the moves that I'm not a huge fan of. I personally don't really like Will Harris. I understand the versatility aspect. I understand the fact that he works very hard and that the coach is really. I'm not necessarily surprised that he came back, but for $3 million a deal for half of what we signed Emmanuel Mosley for, it feels like you could have probably gotten a better player than Will Harris. But that's just my opinion. I just personally don't really like the player. I don't think he makes enough plays. I think he gets burnt too many times in coverage and just isn't the most natural corner or safety. And the fact that he's kind of a tweener means he's not very good at either. So I think bringing him back for almost over $2.5 million fully guaranteed next year wasn't the best deal by Brad Holmes, but you are bringing back a player who's familiar with the defense, familiar with the scheme and the system and the players within it. So it could have been much worse. And then, of course, the last re-signing up to this point is John Kaminsky, who re-signed a 2-year, $8.5 million contract. And I think this is the best re-signing of the period. Either him or Isaiah Buggs, I think, is the best option the Lions had. Isaiah Buggs and John Kaminsky both returning to this lineup. As we all know, John Kaminsky is really the glue of this defense, right? When he was in, the Lions were playing really well. When John Kaminsky played last year, the Lions went 9-3 as a football team. They had significantly more pressures per game, significantly more sacks per game. Aiden Hutchinson looked better. James Houston looked really good when John Kaminsky was there. Every pass rusher looked much better with John Kaminsky in the lineup. And when he missed that 4 to 5 game stretch between weeks 3 against the Minnesota Vikings all the way up to Dallas, the Lions had one sack the entirety of that 1 month stretch, and they went 0-4. They weren't a very good football team without him. And then he returned and they went on their 8-2 run to finish the season, in large part due to the contributions of what John Kaminsky is able to bring to the defense. Now, statistically, he's not going to be the guy that flashes. He's not going to be the guy that pops off the screen. But if you watch the film, if you watch the tape, you watch the Lions play defense at all, you're going to notice number 79 a lot because he is a super impactful player. He is a player that continuously gets pressure, continuously takes up double teams, and continuously makes everybody around him a better and more productive football player. Bringing him back for 2 years, 4.25 a year is a really, really good deal for the Detroit Lions. And then the Lions yesterday did lose a couple of players as Deshaun Elliott signed with the Miami Dolphins for a 1 year, $1.77 million contract. And I don't know the reason the Lions didn't re-sign him. He seemed like a good culture fit. He was obviously a very productive player for the Detroit Lions, was the starting safety all year until he was injured and then came back and continued to play. We saw how much the Lions really needed him when it came to the Panthers game. They were without their starting safety, Deshaun Elliott, and they gave up a ton of rushing yards. They gave up a ton of big plays. They showed that they needed a veteran safety in the backfield, and for 1.17 or for $1.77 million over 1 year, you'd think that you would want to bring Deshaun Elliott back for that price. You'd think that that price is even less than what he should be valued at as a safety. And I don't know if they just didn't feel like they wanted him back. I don't know if they felt like Tracy Walker was enough, if they have a guy in the draft, or if they have another guy in mind for free agency. But that seems like a very good value for Deshaun Elliott, and it seems like the Lions could have potentially gone that way and him. And then, of course, Jamal Williams signs a 3 year, $12 million contract with the New Orleans Saints. Now, this one again had a lot of controversy around it, had a lot of people disagreeing with the decision to let him walk. And obviously, we don't know the behind the scenes stuff. We don't know. Maybe Brad Holmes wanted to give a 1 year deal. Maybe he wanted to give a 2 year deal. If Jamal Williams wanted a long term contract, if Jamal Williams wanted more money to stay in Detroit and felt like he was 1 year back. I don't know what the negotiation process looked like, obviously. And it did say that they were pretty far apart when it came to contract negotiations. But for a 3 year, $4 million contract, get them the NFL's touchdown leader at running back. Jamal Williams, franchise record for rushing touchdowns in a season last year. He was a very good running back, brought a lot of energy to the team, brought a lot of swagger to the team, brought a lot of just really good energy, and I think brought the team up from a morality standpoint, but wasn't the most efficient running back in the NFL. He averaged, I think, 2.4 yards before contact and averaged just 1.7 yards after contact on the season per attempt. Just was a good running back, was a really good short yardage back, was really good at, getting downhill, really good at getting some of those tough yards, but wasn't the explosive back, break off big plays more often than not. And really, I only remember 2 or 3 big plays that Jamal Williams had all year that was more than 10, 15 yards on the ground. And he was very capable of doing that, but for the most part, really wasn't a big threat, was more of a goal line back. And the Lions did get an upgrade from the player point with their newest signing. And with that being a really good transition, let's get on to the signings. We talked about Mac. We talked about Cameron Sutton, but we did not talk about Emmanuel Mosley or David Montgomery yet. Starting off with Mosley, he signed a 1 year, $6 million deal with the Detroit Lions. Now, he does have some concerns. He does have concerns about staying on the field, but when he's on the field, he is an extremely, extremely efficient quarterback. He's somebody that just takes away wide receiver, was a undrafted free agent a few years ago and played well with the San Francisco 49ers. Looks statistically very similar to what Cameron Sutton did, and actually given up a touchdown, I believe, in the last 16 games that he started the boundary cornerback. So if he can stay healthy, he is going to be a very good boundary cornerback. Him and Cameron Sutton should be a really good 1-2 combo at the cornerback position, assuming that they can both stay healthy. Hungry Panda Studios says, not offering Elliott a 1 year, $2 million deal is an L. Like I said, I think that's really good value for Deshaun Elliott. I don't know if they have a draft player in mind. I don't know if they have a different free agent in mind. It's hard to say until they actually make a move and address the whole left. But I don't disagree. I think Elliott for 1 year, $2 million would have been a phenomenal deal, would have been great value. It seems like the move that Brad Holmes would have to sign, but for all we know, Deshaun Elliott would have just not wanted to return to Detroit and wanted to go somewhere where he would be a starting safety versus Detroit, where he likely would have been the safety. So there's a lot of factors to consider. We don't know exactly what happened and what was going on, but those are all things to consider as well. But yeah, I don't disagree. I think that Deshaun Elliott would have been a really good pickup. I think he would be a really good safety three player that I wish the Detroit Lions could have re-signed, but unfortunately, they just weren't able to get the deal done. Now, the last player the Lions have signed up to this point has David Montgomery. David Montgomery, pretty late into the night, 3 year, $18 million contract with the Detroit Lions. And as I said, it's going to lose out on a guy like Jamal Williams. It's going to really suck to lose out on a player with the mindset, a player with just his attitude. But in the same breath, I think that David Montgomery is also a really good player, and I think from the player aspect is an upgrade over what we're getting with Jamal Williams. Now, Nate Peace is also possible he was asking for more from Detroit if he wanted him to stay. That is also true. Again, we don't know the behind-the-scenes negotiation stuff. My guess would be that was either the case or he wanted to go be a starting safety and knew he wouldn't be starting in Detroit because Tracy Walker's returning, because Kirby Joseph developed. I would assume at best he would be safety three on the Detroit Lions, and he might have wanted to go somewhere to get a better opportunity to earn more money in the future and remain as a starter. But getting back to David Montgomery, he is a really, really good player. Has had over 1,000 total scrimmage yards in all four of his first seasons with the Chicago Bears, and did so while having one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL. The Bears did not have a good run blocking offensive line. They did not have a good pass blocking offensive line. And the only reason they were able to lead the league in rushing and lead the league in a bunch of rushing statistics is because Justin Fields had 106 attempts, over 1,100 yards, and a good amount of touchdowns. If you take Justin Fields out of the equation, the Chicago Bears did not have a very good rushing attack. They did not have a very efficient rushing attack. They did not run block very well. Tweet earlier because I did a little research this morning that David Montgomery averaged carry 2 yards before contact every single carry, and they averaged 2 yards after contact every single carry, while Jamal Williams averaged 2.5 yards per carry before contact ever touched him, meaning every rushing attempt that David Montgomery had, realistically, he would get over half a yard more per carry before even getting touched. And then he obviously breaks tackles at a higher rate. He forces missed tackles at a higher rate than Jamal Williams. Is a bigger play threat. It's a better wide receiver. Gets more scrimmage yards more consistently. I wouldn't say is more durable because both of them have been very durable through their NFL careers. Neither one fumbles very often. Neither one gives the football away. But David Montgomery is a good pass protector. He's a good wide receiver. He's very durable. He has, I believe, the fifth most missed tackles since entering the NFL 4 seasons ago, has over 185 missed tackles in 4 seasons, forced missed tackles in 5 seasons. He's just an all-around very good running back. Yes, you're paying him a little bit more. You're paying him roughly $2 million more a season than you would with Williams, and of course, you're losing out on the player and the personality aspect of Jamal Williams. But from a player aspect, David Montgomery is better after contact He's better at making people miss. He's better at forcing missed tackles. He's better at receiving. He has more scrimmage yards, and putting him behind a run blocking offensive line like the Detroit Lions, who's actually really good at run blocking down the field, he should thrive. And I honestly would not be surprised if he gets 12 or even 1,400 rushing yards this season because I think the talent of David Montgomery with the talent of the Lions offensive line is a recipe for success. And him and DeAndre Swift should be a really good running back duo moving. Nate Peace is pumped for the prospect of David Montgomery. Hope he delivers. I do as well. And, just kind of going over, we can go Pro Football Reference and just take a look at some of the statistics because he is a really, really good running back. David Montgomery from the Chicago Bears is a better running back than Jamal Williams is. And I know he only had 801 yards this season, but that is, again, considering that he was running behind the worst offensive line in football. And you have his rookie season where he rushed for 889. His sophomore season ran for 1,000, 800, 800. You're between 5 to 8 touchdowns a year. You're about 4 yards a carry, 3.9 yards per carry in his career. But where he really thrives is as a receiver, where he averages 8 yards a touch. And as a player, just yards per touch in total, he averages 6.4 yards per touch of football. Doesn't turn the ball over very often. Well over 1,000, almost over 1,100 scrimmage yards all 4 seasons of his NFL career. And then you go to some of the advanced statistics where you're going to see things like rushing yards before contact, never been above 2 yards before contact in his career. That is pretty good. Yards after contact, he is right around 400 plus every single year because he makes people miss. He thrives in the open field and is just a very, very good player. Is my microphone okay? Somebody just sent me a message saying that it's a little bit choppy. It should be okay. Choppy time, mostly okay. Okay. StreamYard is being very odd with the mic. What is happening? Right. I have no idea what is going on. So hopefully it's okay. I just replugged everything. Okay. I don't know what is going on, but the microphone situation is not going very good. So we're gonna give it a little bit. I tried to fix it. If it keeps being a problem, we might have to end the stream early. But getting on to the comment of Tony Hawley, the two-headed monster of DeAndre Swift and David Montgomery should be a really good duo. DeAndre Swift, one of the most efficient running backs in the NFL when he is healthy, and David Montgomery being just an all-around really, really good player. Neither one really has the breakaway speed to take it, 90 plus yards to the house, but both of them have enough speed to get some big plays. Both of them have the ability to go make a lot of things happen in the open field, and just overall is a player that I think is an upgrade for the Detroit Lions. But the one thing I really wanted to talk about today is not just the free agent cap space that the Lions have remaining. Because I checked this morning, I was curious to see what the Lions had left in reserve, what the Lions are able to spend at this point. And after a lot of the updates, right after David Montgomery, the most recent signing, was put in, and he's not the only one. John Kaminsky's new deal is in here, as well as Cam Sutton. Every deal the Lions have made is in over the cap right now with the proper numbers and the proper contract structures. I believe even Will Harris's deal, yep, right there, is going to take effect. The Lions have 19, almost $20 million left to spend. They are still a top 10 team in terms of cap space after all these deals have been done, meaning they have the potential to go out and make a few more moves. They have 61 players currently on the roster. They have 8 draft picks. That puts you at 69 players overall of the 75 you can carry into the preseason. That means the Detroit Lions probably are going to sign 1 or 2 more players, because you have to consider there's probably going to be some UDFAs, there's going to be some rookie camps, right? But I would assume the Detroit Lions go to the draft with 63 to 65 players on the roster. You add 8 players, then you add your UDFA class, and that brings you to roughly a 75-man roster. You'll probably have to make a few cuts after a rookie mini camp, but the Lions have $20 million left to spend. You leave about 10 of that for your rookie class, probably 9 to 10 of that for your 8-player rookie class, and you're thinking you have $10 million of cap space that you can realistically use to make your football team better. And while the Lions, I think, are in a good spot right now, they can certainly still continue to improve. In areas where I think they could look to go are wide receiver and linebacker. Those are the 2 positions that continue not to be a problem, but have yet to be addressed after losing significant contributions at both positions. And I do think bringing back DJ Chark would be a really good option. Probably going to get right around what Alan Lazard and Jacoby Myers got, right around the upper echelon of $11 million a year for the top end of this wide receiving free agency class. And I would spend $11 million, even if it takes you down to like right where you probably want to be for your wide receiver market. Maybe DJ Chark takes a hometown deal. Maybe maybe just overall you don't have a whole lot of money after. Is it missing the Mosley deal? I did not see. Oh, so it looks like maybe it is missing the Mosley deal, which seems a little bit odd, but that would be a $6 million deal. So that would still put you at $13 million overall. So not necessarily as much as I originally thought, which is a good point by Hungry Panda Studios, but that leaves you with 13, almost $14 million, because of course Mosley took a $6 million deal, but 13 left is a really good amount of money to go out and spend and get some more free agents, to go out and get some more talent. And I think that, as Nate said, totally agree. I'd love to see the Lions pick up a big body wide receiver. And I mean, I'm not necessarily saying that the Lions should go get a linebacker, because I think they're just the way they use linebackers probably isn't worth it. I don't know how many good linebackers are still out there, but wide receiver especially should, I think, be a need. And we know that Brad Holmes likes big, fast wide receivers, somebody with size and speed who can create separation, right? Guys like DJ Chark, guys like Mike Williams, guys that can create separation, have long strides, have big frames, and just that is the archetype that he likes to sign at wide receiver. He likes his athletes, he likes his separators, and he likes players with a bigger frame. And that is DJ Chark, who they did sign last year. And that's probably the best fit that they have at the moment. And DJ Chark's market value is about $9.5 million a season. I would put it probably 10 to 11 based off what the free agency market looks like at the moment. But if you're going out, you could potentially go look to get him. Or I think the Lions do need to address safety as well. I think with the departure of free safety Deshaun Elliott, they really do need to go get a player. And obviously, you're not going to pay $16 million a year or even 7.5 or anything like that. But there are some good players out there. John Johnson's a good player. Adrian Amos is a good free safety. You have, if you want to go upside, you have Jonathan Abrams, who's a hard-hitting free safety. One of my personal favorites is down here a little bit, but it is Jordan Love from the New York Giants, who is still relatively young, but made Julian Love, who is still very young, but made a lot of plays. If CJ Gardner Johnson, who's not going to take a small contract, but for the right price, he could also be an option here. Taylor Rapp is a good option. This year, Adderley, actually, I think retired this morning, so he would not be an option. But there's still a lot of good options. I think you could add any of those players, right? Adrian Amos, Jonathan Abrams, John Johnson, Julian Love, Taylor Rapp, and improve your safety position significantly. And of course, Jordy Manchun says probably 3 or 4 million will go to a veteran backup quarterback. That is another thought that could potentially be going on, but I really don't see a whole lot of quarterbacks that are going to, one, fit the system, but also be a good value, right? You're not going to sign Wentz or Ryan. You're not going to sign Mariota. I think Teddy Bridgewater is okay, but I don't think he really fits the system like Jared Goff. I don't think he really has the arm strength or the arm talent that they would be looking for to make some of the throws that Goff made last year. He is a little bit more mobile, but just overall, I don't see him fitting in like Jared Goff does to the point where it would make sense. I think he could run the same system, but I don't think he would run it to the same ability as Jared Goff. I wouldn't pick up Mason Rudolph. I think the accuracy issues are too big of a deal. I wouldn't pick up 38-year-old Joe Flacco or 33-year-old Blaine Gabbert. Neither would Chase Daniel. I think Drew Lock potentially is an option, but I don't think it would cost you $4 million a year. That would probably cost you maybe half of that, as Drew Lock really just doesn't have a high market right now. Brandon Allen is 30. I wouldn't really go for him. Neither Josh Johnson. Nate Sudfeld, played here last year, knows the system, could potentially be coming back as a backup quarterback again. Nathan Peterman, I don't think is the best option you could take. Jeff Driscoll. I think Cooper Rush is going to ask for probably more than $4 million just because of the game-winning drives he had last year. Brett Rippon's okay, but isn't really anything special. I wouldn't feel confident with him or really any of these other quarterbacks coming in and making a true difference other than maybe Gardner Minshew, who I think also is going to ask for a decent amount of money. So I think backup quarterback is something that needs to be addressed, but I also think it's probably something that they're going to address in the draft because I don't think anybody really fits in with what the Lions are potentially looking for. Again, just kind of going down the list, there's not that many quarterbacks left. I think Drew Lock is probably your best bet. He's probably going to be the cheapest with the most upside. Mason Rudolph potentially is a veteran with some experience, but really, you're not going to find a whole lot. Sign John Johnson at safety. That is an option for sure. That is certainly something that can happen. We can go back over to the safeties and just take a look. I think he'll be a little bit more on the expensive side. I think for safety at this point, you're thinking probably 4 to 5 million at the most. And John Johnson probably going to be just a tad over it. But I don't think John Johnson would be a bad safety at all, coming over from originally the Los Angeles Rams, and I believe went to the Cleveland Browns last season. But we can go take a look at John Johnson statistically. Did play for the Browns last season as a safety. He started 17 games, made 101 tackles, 4 tackles for loss, a half a sack, 2 fumble recoveries, 2 forced fumbles, 4 passes defended, and an interception. I think his market should be relatively high. I think the only reason he was ever cut from the Cleveland Browns is because they just mismanaged their cap space pretty significantly. Obviously, giving up a decent amount of yards in coverage, but only giving up 1 touchdown in coverage and coming away with 1 interception. He forces some good turnovers. He's a good veteran. He's a good leader. Never having a year without an interception, which is important. Again, he would come in and play the safety 3, which I don't think is the most ideal role for a lot of players that have starting success and have been starters in the NFL. Holmes wanted him when he signed with the Browns. That is true. That is a story that did come out, was that Brad Holmes was targeting John Johnson. I don't know if they still want John Johnson. I don't know how comfortable they feel with Ifeatu Mufonu being your safety 3. Again, they could potentially be looking to draft a player because there's a lot of good safeties in the class. But for sure, John Johnson is absolutely a player that could be targeted by the Detroit Lions. But That is true, that Brad Holmes was targeting him prior to, I think, the actual first free agency period that they ever went through as the Detroit Lions general manager. Brad Holmes did try to sign him, and he has played the last 2 seasons with the Cleveland Browns where he's played pretty well for the most part. He did have a down year last year, but in 2021, coming away with 3 interceptions in 15 games, only allowing 308 yards in coverage total. I think John Johnson is a good option. I think he'd be on the more expensive side, and we know that Brad Holmes likes his value. But overall, I think the Lions are in a good position right now. I don't know if they have the money or if they'd feel comfortable going out and getting a bigger name free agent, somebody for $6, $7 million, because as we've spoken about, they only have about 14 left. So I think something around the $5 million a year range or 5 million this year at the very least would be ideal because of course that would leave you with just under $10 million for your draft clutch, which is probably what you want, right? You as it depends on obviously how many players you have, but for an 8 player class, you want roughly $10 million. That is kind of a healthy number to have to sign all of your rookies and have just a little bit left over in the end. So the Lions right now are realistically looking at $5 million that they can continue to spend in free agency. And I think that they could address safety or they could address wide receiver. Probably not enough money to go for both, but I think it's enough money to get at least one more impact player, potential starter for this team. If you're talking about safety, John Johnson, I think for $5 million would be a good value. Same thing for Adrian Amos. Adrian Amos, a little bit older, kind of a more veteran player. His value is about 7 million, but we've seen them get lower money than I think Spot Track values most safeties at. Last year, he had a pretty solid year with the Green Bay Packers. Could again see another division rival stay in the division to take on the Packers. I think that Terrell Edmonds could potentially be a safety who is young and could fill in as a safety 3 right around that perfect value that you would be looking for ideally for a safety at this point in time. I drafted the like button. I appreciate that. If you haven't liked the video yet, go ahead and like the video, help the algorithm, help get some more people in here to talk about some Lions football because that is what we are here to do today. But with that being said, getting back to some of the safety options, you of course have AJ Moore, cousin or brother of CJ Moore, the current Detroit Lion. You have Kareem Jackson, who's older and I think would probably benefit more to a specialized safety 3 role opposed to a full starting safety like he used to be in Denver. I think you have Keanu Neal, who's more of a linebacker safety, right? Somebody that plays more near the box, but could potentially come to the Detroit Lions and add that physical presence like Deshaun Elliott did last year. You have of course, as we mentioned, Deion Bush, who's a decent young safety. You have Dean Marlowe, who could return as the third safety, knows the system a little bit, was here 2 years ago. You have Taylor Rapp, who I think is a good young safety, only 25 years old, had some turnovers last year, is valued by Spot Track to be quite a bit more than I would expect personally, but he could be an option. You, of course, have guys like Tony Jefferson, who's a kind of older veteran safety, could be your safety 3. You have Justin Evans, who's 27, coming over from New Orleans, was very efficient in Tampa Bay, but didn't really have the most success in New Orleans. He is now currently a free agent and could potentially be looking for a home in Detroit. He should not be too expensive. You have Carl Joseph, who is older, but again adds that physical presence to what you have and adds kind of a physical presence as a hard hitter. Bobo Lance has got an estimate on how much the draft class is going to cost against salary cap. It depends on how many rookies you have, how many picks you have. The Lions currently have 8. They have 5 in the top 100, and they have 3 outside the top 100. I would guess it would roughly cost about $9 to $10 million of the salary cap, which again is pretty typical. About $9 to $10 million for a 7 to 8 player draft class is pretty typical in the NFL. With the Lions having 5 top 100 picks, it might be just a little bit, a tad more expensive than that on the higher end, closer to $10 million, but it shouldn't cost a whole lot more than that. Meaning the Lions, as we've said, have about 3 to $5 million left to realistically spend in free agency before having to kind of shut down shop for the draft. Do we run a lot of 3 safety sets? Yes, we did. I can go take a look at the Detroit Lions. I don't know the exact number, but we can go to Detroit Lions. And he does like Aaron Glenn does like his 3 safety sets quite a lot. We can go to the 2022 Detroit Lions and take a look at just snap counts in general. I know it is on here somewhere. Defensive snap counts right there. So, looking at the Detroit Lions, Kirby Joseph obviously played a lot, as did Deshaun Elliott. And Will Harris, the safety, played about 58% of snaps, although he did start some time at cornerback. And then when Tracy Walker was on the field, he played a lot. Juju Hughes got a lot of time because he was the third safety at points. Tracy Walker played 12% of the snaps despite only playing in 2.5 games. The Lions like to use their safeties a lot. When they were on the field, the 3 safeties were Tracy Walker, Deshaun Elliott, and then Kirby Joseph got a little bit of time, but did kind of split that with Will Harris and Juju Hughes. But yes, to answer the question, yes, the Lions do use 3 safety sets quite a lot. And, going back to 2 years ago when they were fully healthy, you obviously had guys like Tracy Walker, and then you had Dean Marlowe as the third safety. And I'm blanking on the second safety, but I know the Lions had one more player that was pretty prominent. But yes, Aaron Glenn likes to run 3 safety sets quite a lot. And while I think Ifeatu Melifonwu is a good player and I think showed some good strides toward the end of the year, the injury concerns obviously have piled up for him. You have the concerns of whether he's ever going to be a starting caliber safety. I think he is pretty good. I think this is potentially an option for them. Melifonwu being Ifeatu. A 6'3" safety, 210 pounds, has the range, has the hands, only started 1 game last year, and that was the Carolina Panthers, but did play a lot against the Chicago Bears as well. Really only had 2 games where he played significant defensive snaps. And against the Carolina Panthers, he did struggle. As you can see here, he played most against Carolina and Chicago, where he played. He doesn't have snaps there, but he did play significantly against these 2 teams. Didn't play very well against Carolina, but did only give up 3 for 35 and a touchdown. Not great, but not horrible. He didn't give up any big plays over the top. And then against the Chicago Bears, was targeted 3 times. Did have, I believe, 1 pass breakup on the Chicago Bears and did only give up 33% for 14 yards. I would assume passes defended around here somewhere, but he had a pretty good game versus Chicago, showed some strides forward, didn't play very much versus the Packers because Kirby Joseph and Deshaun Elliott were both healthy for that game. But I think Ifeatu Melifonwu has a lot to contribute to the team. I think he has the skill set to succeed in the NFL because he is 6'3". He does have long arms. He does have range. He does have ball skills. And I think, transitioning to safety this year really slowed his progress because obviously you're learning a new position. You're learning how to play it for the first time. But you look at the second game that he played, right? His second real game snaps, 3 targets, 1 reception, 14 yards, average of just 4.7 yards a target, allowed 0 touchdowns, and just a quarterback rating of 49.3. Didn't allow a lot of yak because, again, he just didn't. Had a half a sack in that game, which I actually did not realize. And then if we go just to game logs normal from 2022, we can see that didn't really play a lot of defensive snaps until that Carolina game. Played about 50% against Chicago. Came away with a half a sack, 2 2 solos and 2 assisted, 4 total tackles, and actually 2 passes defended on the 3 targets. So Ifeatu could be your safety of the future, but I think betting on a young player with limited experience is a little bit risky. You do obviously have the opportunity there, as you can see, did get some time and did learn pretty quickly from his mistakes. Panthers game was his first start in the show. It did. It did 100%. And he's not a run supporting safety. He's not going to be somebody like Deshaun Elliott who's going to come up and hit. He's a coverage safety. He's a finesse safety. He's somebody that doesn't like to be super physical around the line of scrimmage, and they asked him to play Deshaun Elliott's role. Whereas if I think if he was playing Kirby Joseph's role, he would have been more successful. I think that's the role he played more versus the Chicago Bears, being around the line of scrimmage, but being more in coverage, being more of a safety that had to cover space, not go and make a tough tackle versus a physical runner. And that's where you really saw it. Right. So if you're talking about a three safety set with a deep, two deep safeties and Tracy Walker coming down or Kirby Joseph coming down towards the line of scrimmage, playing more of the Sean Elliott role, then I think he could thrive in that role. I think that Ifeatu Melifonwu being a deep half, deep middle fielding free safety would yield some results. So potentially the Lions already have their safety three on the roster, and they feel comfortable enough with that to let Deshaun Elliott walk for a really cheap deal because they know they're getting Tracy back by week one. They know how good Kirby Joseph is, and they're really the only team that knows how far along Ifeatu Melifonwu is in his current development stages. So that is also an option to consider, especially when thinking about why Deshaun Elliott might have left. It's very possible that the Lions have faith in Ifeatu Melifonwu, and they're going to just go with him for going forward and maybe draft a guy to be the safety four while Iffy gets a little bit of a promotion along the defensive secondary. Okay, glad I caught you on my way in from radiation therapy. Good take on Iffy if he's deep all the way. Yeah, I hope that your appointment well. I hope your radiation therapy is going very well. Glad to have you here talking some Detroit Lions. But yeah, I think that Ifeatu Melifonwu is is a really good player. I think that once he kind of finds his role, once he kind of settled in and knew what he was doing, there is a lot of good things that he did for the secondary. And we're talking about just simply coverage because again, he's not a tackler, he's not a physical player necessarily. He is 6'3", 210, but just isn't the most physical of hitters, is definitely more of a take the football away, right? Jump the pass, use your length for use your length to your advantage, which I think helped him at cornerback and then it would help him in did safety versus the Chicago Bears. But he's not that physical run presence. He's not that thumper. He's not somebody who's going to jar the football loose. He's not somebody that thrives down by the box. But again, playing up kind of a high safety role, you have him and Kirby Joseph as your two highs, and then you have Tracy Walker coming in, taking away tight end in man coverage or just being around the box for a run support player. I think that three safety duo would be more than sufficient enough. And then, of course, maybe you go and draft a DB. Maybe you go and sign a smaller DB or a smaller contract DB and go out and get some more depth. But as far as your starters, it's very possible the Lions have all of their starters defensively on the roster right now, at least in the secondary. There's a lot of DB depth in the draft, too. There absolutely is. There absolutely 100% is a ton of DBs in this class that I think are very good, and some of them are not projected to go very highly, right? We'll just, go through some of the DBs in this class. We'll start off at cornerback because I think that there's a realistic shot the Lions go cornerback at some point. You have Devon Witherspoon, of course. You have Christian Gonzalez, who everybody knows about those two. But then you have Joey Porter Jr., who I think is the most Sauce Gardner-like prospect in this class. You have Deontay Banks, who's very good. You have Emmanuel Forbes, who's very opportunistic and gets a lot of interceptions and is very aggressive in the style of play, like I think the Lions would like. Good in man coverage. You have Cam Smith, who's physical in man coverage. You have Tyreek Stevenson, who has kind of that ideal body size. Same thing with Garrett Wilson, but he did struggle. Garrett Williams, but did struggle with some injuries. You have Eli Ricks, who was graded very highly in man coverage. You have Keely Ringo, who was graded very highly in man coverage. You have Clark Phillips, who was, again, graded really well in man coverage. Darius Rush is a good cornerback. Jalen Jones is a good cornerback. I like Q Blue Kelly. I think that DJ Turner's an underrated prospect. Keetrell Clark, although I think he's more of a slot DB, is a very good player. Riley Moss is good. Mekhi Blackman is, I think, the most underrated DB in this class, just based off of the statistics that I have seen, based off of the little bit that I have seen of Mekhi Blackman. I think he's the most underrated cornerback in this class. You have Mekhi Gardner, who was pretty good at LSU. So you're talking about being midway into the fifth round and still finding players that can be productive. And then you go over to safety, and I think safety is just as deep, if not deeper, than the cornerback class. You have Brian Branch, who is kind of more of a slot cornerback, but also can play safety. You have Antonio Johnson. You have Sidney Brown, who I think is one of my favorite safeties in this class. Reminds me a lot of Talanoa Hufanga coming out. You have Jamie Robinson, who the Lions interviewed at the combine. You have Jordan Battle, who is one of my favorites as well in this draft class. You have Christopher Smith, who's a pretty good coverage linebacker, but isn't afraid to be physical. You have LJ Skinner, who's 6'4" and would be an absolute weapon versus tight ends. You have Jair Brown, who is a really good ball hawk. You have Rashad Torrance, who does have some ball skills, is lacking ball skills, doesn't really have the best hands, but does get himself in position to make plays. You have Brandon Joseph, who's projected to be a first round pick before the college football season is played. You have just a lot of really, really good safeties in this class. Trey Dean, another player that's really, really good who I've watched and I like. Ronnie Hickman, I think, is a solid corner or solid safety as well, who was graded very highly by PFF and is a strong tackler and strong thumper. So you don't even have to go safety early. I mean, you could wait till round two, late in round two, and go Sidney Brown. You could go round three and get Jamie Robinson. You can go round three and get Jordan Battle. You can go round 4 or even 5 and get LJ Skinner, who unfortunately did get injured at the combine, or at his pro day, one of the two, or during a personal workout. He tore his pectoral very recently. You have Jair Brown, who's going to be there on day 3. Probably you have Brandon Joseph, who's going to be there on day 3. Like, there's a lot of good quality DB talent in this class. Kool-Aid and Cornbread, member of the channel. So what up, Joe? How are you doing today? I'm glad you got here to talk some Lions football. The Ronnie99 says, still have CJ Moore and Brady Breeze. They do like iffy thumbs up. Yeah, it is true. I think CJ Moore, very good special teams player, but has some range and made a really big pass breakup in that first game versus the Packers that helped them win. That fits Campbell's mentality and scheme. THT. I don't THT. I'm assuming you're talking about a player's initials, but I don't. I'm blanking. Oh, you're talking probably Trevius Hodges Tomlinson. Yeah, I think he would. I'm not the highest on him because he is undersized and is a primarily slot cornerback, which I think the Lions have pretty much covered. They don't really need slot players, they need boundary players. So I'm not the highest on him as far as a scheme fit because they just don't really need a slot DB right now. But I don't think he's necessarily a bad player in the NFL draft. Mekhi Gardner is a 6'2" press corner at USC. Mekhi Gardner, I believe, is an LSU cornerback, actually. You're thinking of Mekhi Blackman. Mekhi Gardner is from LSU. But yeah, both of them I think are actually very good cornerbacks. Both of them were solid in college this year. Both of them were really, really good. And I actually found Mekhi Blackman by mistake just because I was going through the draft looking for some late round gems, some late round prospects. And when I looked up, because the way I do prospects is, at least at the very beginning, I like to just see their statistics because I think that if they're a liability, I mean, if they're giving up huge plays and they're giving up a ton of stats, that is super concerning. But if somebody stands out statistically, then you can take a look and say, well, what do they do well? Why are they doing that? I think statistics are something that a lot of people say, oh, you just grade or you just draft or you just evaluate off the box score. But the box score is important. The statistics are important. And a guy like Mekhi Blackman is a player that I think would fit the Detroit Lions system. He's a player that did not play in the slot, played only on the boundary and a little bit in the box. 14 games. I'll make it just a little bit bigger because I'm realizing that you guys might not be able to see it. 14 games, 907 defensive snaps, 534 coverage snaps, 30 receptions on 63 targets, 286 yards allowed all season in 530 coverage snaps, allowed 276 yards, a single touchdown, walking away 3 interceptions, and having a 46.1 quarterback rating allowed. Now, the overall grade by PFF is 90.6. I don't necessarily take a ton of stock in PFF grades, but what I do take a lot of stock in is passer rating, is yards, incompletion percentage allowed. And Mekhi Blackman is a player that is completely shut down at the cornerback position. He's only 6 foot 175, so not the biggest cornerback, but plays so incredibly well. Now, Cheba says Trevias. I always mess up his Trevias Hodges Tomlinson. I can't remember it. Easier to say. I got it eventually. I just blanked on it. Eli Ricks is a standout from Bama. Should be there in the third. Yeah, Eli Ricks is another really good player who did, I think, transferred over from LSU and then did go to Bama and played really well from what I saw as not a fan of Alabama, but a player, somebody that obviously watched a lot of tape. But a 9 games played for Eli Ricks. He is a little bit bigger, like more that prototypical press man, 6'2", 190. Played only 224 coverage snaps, but did have just 6 receptions allowed all season on 19 targets, so really good there. Less than 100 yards total through 9 games, which is incredible. And then, of course, you have 0 touchdowns. Didn't come away with an interception, but did only allow a 45.3 completion percentage. And I think the thing that stands out most about Eli Ricks is this number, and really all of these numbers, but this number specifically, 77 yards on 224 coverage snaps, 77 yards in 9 games. And, of course, the passer rating as well, but just really, really good. And, yeah, he did struggle to stay on the field, right? You obviously want somebody that can stay healthy, and he hasn't been able to stay healthy throughout his collegiate career, which is why he's probably going to be available on day 2, if not even day 3, because of the injury concerns. But you're talking about a player that shuts people down. Eli Ricks is a really, really good cornerback. And then, of course, we could talk about Garrett Wilson. I keep saying Garrett Wilson. Garrett Williams as well, the cornerback from Syracuse. I believe is coming off a torn ACL, if I'm not mistaken. Only played 7 games this year. Did play 170 snaps, 14 receptions, 21 targets, 253 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions, 84 quarterback rating. He is 6 foot 189. Again, a little bit short for a cornerback, but pretty much the right size that you're looking for. I think he's good. I think he has good ball skills. I think he has good recovery speed. Um, isn't the best cornerback in this class. And of course, coming off the ACL injury, that is really, really concerning. He's not my favorite cornerback, but I think he's pretty solid, right? I think you can do a lot worse than Garrett Williams, and I think you could develop him into a very good corner. Against top competition, so Ricks did not have it easy. Yeah, I mean, they obviously played against the SEC. I don't know exactly who he matched up against each and every day, but yes, 100% true. The SEC obviously has some really good wide receivers, and he had to go against them day in and day out. We can take a look. I'm failing to remember any wide receivers from the SEC right now, but I'm sure some of them exist. Okay, maybe not. Jalen Hyatt obviously was a big one from the SEC. Keyshawn Butte, Cedric Tillman. There's certainly some draftable guys. Yes, Ricks did transfer from LSU. I believe that this year he was the first year at Alabama. He spent the last 2 years at LSU. And, I mean, has always been a very good cornerback. Like, do not get me wrong. He has always been a solid cornerback, even going back to LSU. His problem is he can't stay healthy, right? I mean, you're talking as a freshman, 279 coverage snaps, 13 receptions, 270 yards. Did give up 2 touchdowns, but came with 4 interceptions, 60 quarterback rating. Then, of course, you had a little bit down 21. You had 6 games, 204, 11 receptions on 17 targets for 173, 1-1, 84 quarterback rating, but by no means a bad quarterback rating. And then last year was completely shut down. It's just a problem of can he stay on the field, because he has struggled the absolute most is his inability to remain on the football field, right? He's a great player when he's on. He's a great player when he's playing. The problem is he's not playing, and that is a really, really concerning factor because the Lions have had injury-prone players in the past. The Lions have had guys that haven't panned out because they haven't been on the field, and those are the players that scare you as a GM or should scare the Lions as a GM which is why I'm not high on guys like Brian Brzee, which is why I'm not high on guys that can't stay on the field even if they have really high upside, is because if you're not on the field, it doesn't matter how talented you are, you're not making an impact, and the only thing you're doing on the injury reserve is hurting your football team. So for me, injury prone guys are players that I don't like touching unless it is the third, the fourth, or sometime on day three. Obviously, if it's a super good talent, I'm thinking kind of in the realm of a Josh Pascal, right? Where it's probably a first round talent, but he falls to the second round due to injury. That's kind of the area where it's like, okay, that's where you take your shot on injury prone guys. That's where you take your shot on a high ceiling or, guys that could develop into something really special, but just haven't been on the field enough to develop or just haven't been there enough. That's kind of when you take your shot. Or again, if they're kind of like second, third round talents, but they have injury concerns, which I think Eli Ricks is a late first, early second round talent, but they have injury concerns and they can't stay on the field, that's when you really start to get concerned. And that's where they start to fall to day three. Some of them become absolute steals and some of them don't amount to anything, but the risk is severely minimized because you spent a day three pick on them. Um, just taking a look. Have I talked about Forbes? I have not. I talked a little bit about Forbes, but we can go take a look. Emmanuel, is it just Forbes? Yes, it is. PFF rating. I like PFF because it tracks a lot of really good statistics. I don't care about their grades. I care about these numbers. So Emmanuel Forbes played in 12 games. Actually, for being undersized, really played in a lot of games. But this year played 12 games, 430 snaps, 31 receptions on 58 targets, 284 yards, excuse me, 3 touchdowns, but 6 interceptions, having a 44.7 QBR allowed. The 6 interceptions is impressive. I think he led college football in pick sixes, as well as I think leading program history, maybe even NCAA history, with most pick sixes in a career, which is pretty crazy. Gets a lot of interceptions, has a ton of production, does give up the big play from time to time, right? Does give up touchdowns, does give up some big plays, as you can see here, 518 at 602 yards, but did get better. Gave up less receptions, gave up less yards, gave up less touchdowns this year, had more interceptions than ever before, and is a pretty good corner. 6 foot, 180. He is a little bit on the slimmer side, right? I think that for that reason, he is a second round DB prospect. He is a little bit undersized. There is concern about him potentially being big enough to survive the physicality at the next level. I think you have similar concerns with guys like Devon Witherspoon. You have similar concerns with other smaller cornerbacks, right? You need weight to survive in the NFL because you're going to get hit a lot and your body needs to withstand some punishment. I think that, really, Emmanuel Forbes, that's really the only big thing that you're concerned about is, well, can he stay healthy? Can he stay on the field? And he did that a lot in college. He did that a ton in the SEC, but the NFL is a completely different thing. And there is some real true areas and reasons to be concerned about Emmanuel Forbes because at the end of the day, he's a smaller cornerback that isn't always going to be healthy for you. But I do think Emmanuel Forbes is a good prospect. And honestly, pretty much going through all of these prospects, not wide receivers, but going through most of the DB prospects, right? Going through corners, going through safeties, there's not a whole lot the Lions can do wrong. Needs to spend time with Joe Schuler in the weight room. Probably, probably does. But, just talking about defensive backs in general, right? You're talking about Javon Witherspoon could be an addition who would be very good. You're talking about Christian Gonzalez would start. Brian Branch would be very good. Joey Porter would be good. Dante Banks, Emmanuel Forbes, Cam Smith, Tyreek Stevenson, Antonio Johnson. You have Garrett Williams, Sidney Brown. You have Eli Ricks, who is ranked as the 61st prospect, but again, as those injury concerns arise, you probably see him fall into the third round. You have Julius Brent, who's a 6'3" cornerback. I think fits the ideal size of like that press mid corner a little bit better. So the Lions could look to go for size and athleticism, maybe over some production. You have Jamie Robinson, who again the Lions didn't meet with at the combine. You have Jordan Battle, you have Keely Ringo, you have Clark Phillips, you have Darius Rush, like so many good, talented defensive backs in this class. Obviously, not all of them are going to go in the first 50, 60 picks, right? You're going to have some round three, even some day three guys that probably should have gone in day two. You're going to have some round two guys that probably are talented enough to go in day one, but just because of the sheer number of good players in this class, you're going to get value. You're going to get Keely Ringo probably in the second round. You're going to get Jordan Battle probably in the third round. You're going to get Jamie Robinson in the third round and Darius Rush in the third round. You're going to get Christopher Smith maybe even on day three. You're going to get LJ Skinner in the sixth round because of his injury, but he's a good player that's valued higher than that. With what's going on with Carter, who is worth taking at six? Wilson, Witherspoon, Gonzalez, trade down, other. Um, that is a very good question. I think it's hard to speak on Jalen Carter without knowing the exact circumstances. I think there's a lot of factors that could have contributed to his poor his poor pro day performance. I think there's a lot of factors that could have led to a lot of the red flags that we're seeing with Carter right now. I I'm kind of still in the same boat where it goes if Brad Holmes is comfortable, if Brad Holmes feels like he can get the most out of Jalen Carter, and they meet with Jalen Carter and they speak with him and they're like, hey, this is what we're feeling, this is what we're doing, like what's going on, and he's even there in the first place, and they feel comfortable drafting him, then I think that it would be the right pick. Jalen Carter, based off of the tape, based off of the film, is the best player in this draft class. That is debatable, but pretty common opinion. However, if Brad Holmes meets with him and all these red flags pop up, and you have all these things like, oh, you are concerned about the off the field stuff, you are really concerned that he's out of shape for his pro day, you are concerned about all these red flags that a lot of fans seem to be concerned about, then you probably don't want to pick him, and then it becomes a different option. Now, I think that the Seahawks are gearing up. It seems like they're releasing a lot of their defensive tackles because they expect to get Jalen Carter at number 5, or they could, potentially be looking elsewhere. But in this mock draft, he just happened to go number 5. But you have some options, right? And I'm just going to play as all of the teams, not to be biased towards the Lions, but to just show what I think is realistic, right? I think that CJ Stroud will be the first overall pick. I think he fits their system the best. I think that's just how it is. And I'm not going to do a full mock draft. Just want to show you who I think will be available for the Lions. Number 2, I think will be Bryce Young. Number 3, I think will either be a trade out or will be Tyree Wilson. I think they're going to make a mistake. They're going to take the athlete over the product, and they're going to take Tyree Wilson. The Cardinals will be. The Colts, I think, are going to take Will Levis. I just do. And then the Seahawks, realistically, I think in this situation with the defensive tackles that they lost and some of the defensive tackles that they cut on the D-line, I think Jalen Carter would be the pick here. I really, really do. Which leaves the Detroit Lions with quite a few interesting options. They could trade down. They could potentially go from, if the Jets don't have a quarterback yet, if the Falcons want to jump, if the Titans, for whatever reason, maybe want to jump up. It really depends, right? You have probably 2 or 3 suitors that could potentially look to trade up. You could take Anthony Richardson, who I think at number 6 would be the right value. You could take Will Anderson, who, again, I think is the second best player in this class. Or you could go corner. There's a lot of different ways that you can go. In this scenario, I would take Will Anderson. In this scenario, I think that Will Anderson is the best pick you can make. I think he is the best player you can take. I have him graded as the second best player in the class, only behind Jalen Carter. And then it goes some quarterbacks, and then it goes Tyree Wilson. I have Will Anderson graded as my second best player in the class. PFF has him graded as the third. If the Lions get the third best quarterback, or second best player in the class, they get the arguably best defensive player in the class. right? Because you can argue it's Jalen Carter, but Will Anderson doesn't have any off the field problems. Will Anderson's looking good in the offseason, so he might move up the prospect boards to number one. You get the best defensive player in the draft at number 6. You don't pass on the opportunity to do that. So that is kind of where I'm at. The Lions are pretty much guaranteed because I think the Cardinals, the Colts, and the Texans are all going to go quarterback, meaning one of Tyree Wilson, Jalen Carter, or Will Anderson will be available. And I think you take whatever one of those three falls. Now, in the unfortunate circumstance where Tyree Wilson and Will Anderson go 3-5, and the Lions don't like Jalen Carter, then I think it gets a little bit interesting because one quarterback will be available. Anthony Richardson will be available if that scenario goes. Right? Jalen Carter and Anthony Richardson at the top of the boards. And I think somebody will want to trade up for Anthony Richardson. It might not be the Vegas Raiders because they obviously just got Jimmy Garoppolo, but you're talking the Jets don't get a deal done. You're talking the Commanders potentially are obviously they've said they're going to go with Sam Howell, but they might not truly want to go with Sam Howell into the season. You're talking about the Buccaneers don't have a real quarterback, right? They have Baker Mayfield for 1 year. How likely is it that they want Baker Mayfield for a long-term extension, right? There is a lot of teams that I think could potentially look to trade up. Or, the Seahawks could also go quarterback. Atlanta could go quarterback. There's a ton of options, right? Fair. I think we could all agree that these are things that are realistic to happen. Atlanta does need a quarterback. That is true. But I think the ideal scenario is you get Tyree Wilson or Will Anderson. If both of those players are gone at 6, I think the best option would be to trade down. So obviously here I would take Will Anderson. If Anderson and Tyree go, I would take Carter. If the Lions don't like Carter in that scenario, I would look to trade down, or I would simply, and this is 100% true. I'm not saying this is a hot take. I would take Lucas Van Ness at 6. I think if the top 3 defensive players go, or Jalen Carter's the only one left on the board, and you don't like Jalen Carter, I would go Lucas Van Ness from Iowa. I 100% sincerely mean that because I think he is a top 4, top 5 defensive player in this class. I think he is right there with Tyree Wilson. It goes Will Anderson at edge rusher, and then 2A is Lucas Van Ness and Tyree Wilson. I do not know yet who is going to come out on top, but I would say Lucas Van Ness. He is 6'5", 272, a freaky athlete, super productive, has some crazy bend for the size that he has long arms, he is super productive, he is relentless, plays the 3-tech, plays the edge, plays any position you could ever want in a lineman. Other than nose tackle, he plays every position on the defensive line very well. He's a smart player, works really hard, and he's going under the radar because Iowa did not start him. Lucas Van Ness did not make a start in his senior year or in his sophomore year because seniors played above him because that's the Iowa tradition. But Lucas Van Ness, on half the snaps that Aiden Hutchinson took in his senior season, was more efficient than Aiden Hutchinson in the same conference while playing some of the best offensive lines in the country. If the option is to take a quarterback or trade down, and neither of those things are things Brad Holmes wants to do, I would go Lucas Van Ness from Iowa at the 6th overall pick because I think he is right up there with Tyree Wilson. I think he's right up there with potentially even Jalen Carter and Will Anderson. I think he is a phenomenal player. I did pass a comment because I was just explaining. Moving on, what's the thought on linebacker Alex Anzalone and Malcolm Rodriguez? But after that, the pickings are slim. Doesn't seem like there's much depth. I like Derek Barnes a lot personally. I think Derek Barnes is a very good linebacker. That's just my personal opinion. And then you do have Anthony Pittman returning behind him. Lions do only play 1 or 2 linebackers at a time. They don't play a ton of 3 linebacker sets because that's just not what Aaron Glenn likes to do. He'd rather have DBs and safeties on the field than linebackers. I think Deion Henley in the second round would be phenomenal. I think Jack Campbell, Drew Sanders, Trent Simpson would all be very good. I think that DeMar Overshawn is a great prospect. Ivan Pace is a really good prospect. Noah Sewell, I'm not super high on. I think he's a day three pick, but could add some run stuffing ability. Same thing with Owen Popo. I think Ventrell Miller's very good. I think Aubrey Miller Jr. is very good. I think Drake Thomas is very solid. There's, I mean, a lot of linebackers up and down the board that are very good and productive players that you can get on day two or three and build depth. But as far as your linebacker position, this is my opinion, but I know a lot of people share it as well. Linebacker is the least valuable position on the defense. I think it's one of the most replaceable positions on the defense. And quite honestly, I wouldn't draft linebacker until day two, maybe even day three, because I know on day three, I could get probably DeMarvian Overshow. I could probably get Ivan Pace. I could get Owen Popo. I could get Ventrell Miller or Aubrey Miller or D Winters on day three, and they'll probably be just as effective in the right positions as a guy like Jack Campbell, as a guy like Drew Sanders, or even Trent Simpson, because it's just a pretty replaceable position at this point. Can you imagine the third along the lines roll out Will Anderson, Aiden Hutchinson, James Houston, and John Kaminsky? I, I mean, any of them. Literally, any of the situations like that, I would be ecstatic, right? Because as of right now, you have Hutchinson, you have Houston, you have Kaminsky, even Romeo Okwara was pretty good to end the season last year. You put out on a third and long, obvious pass rushing downs, Hutchinson and Houston, and then you put out Kaminsky or Okwara, both of whom have shown the ability to collapse the pocket and rush the passer and put the quarterback under pressure. And then you pull out either Will Anderson, who's a freak, you pull out Jalen Carter, who's a monster in the middle. You throw out Tyree Wilson, who's a crazy athlete. You throw out Lucas Van Ness, who's basically an Aiden Hutchinson clone. Like, you throw out any of the top defensive linemen onto this roster right now, it's a disgusting group. I mean, simply gross. And like in the best ways possible. And of course, you have Isaiah Buggs, you have Aleem McNeil. Like, those are good run stopping guys. They should not be able to do anything. That defensive line should dominate for a long, long time. It would be really fun to watch. Anderson would make the NASCAR package even scarier. The NASCAR package is already disgusting. Like, it's already so good, and I agree. Will Anderson would make it even better. But if they pass on Will Anderson, no, I wouldn't question Brad Holmes as a general manager, but I would question the decision very heavily. I have a feeling we will draft a defensive tackle if we don't take Carter. Where would you want to take one, and who would you want to take? That was kind of what I was talking about with Van Ness, right? Him and Hutchinson, I think, were very good. Hutchinson did play some snaps on the inside last year. He did play the three tech just a little bit, and I mean, obviously, was pretty good at it. The dude's 6'7", and he's huge and he's strong and he's just a monster athlete. But Lucas Van Ness can do the same thing. You could potentially even run packages where Aiden Hutchinson, like on passing downs, where Lucas Van Ness and Aiden Hutchinson are your two interior guys over the guards. And then you have James Houston and Julian Okwara or Romeo Okwara or John Kaminsky on the outside. And that, again, would be just such a good pass rush, such a good run stop. And that's kind of what I was saying. I think defensive tackle is an option, but we're not looking for a nose tackle. We're looking for a three tech. We're looking for somebody that can pass rush from inside the guard, and Lucas Van Ness can do that. So can Aiden Hutchinson if you wanted him to. You could rotate those two around. You can rotate Kaminsky around, and he can play that role. You can put, Romeo Cora in that role, and he can play that. Like, there are a ton of options, and I think it is a need that could be addressed because obviously you have four starters on the defensive line most snaps, and I think kind of rotation of Houston, Hutchinson, and Kaminsky, and Aleem McNeil, and Isaiah Buggs, and Okwara, and you, of course, have Josh Pascal, who came on late at the end of the year and showed a lot of flashes throughout the year. And then you add Lucas Van Ness, or you add Will Anderson, or you add Tyree Wilson, or you add Jalen Carter, who played at Georgia, like the Jalen Carter that was the best player in the draft, and you're getting elite playmakers on the field all over, and you can rotate them because you have 6 or 7. Steelers released Miles Jack today. I did see that earlier. I And I know that last season he was kind of a big like, "Oh, the Lions should go sign him." I did not follow the Steelers very closely. I'm not fully aware of how well he did. 6'1" outside linebacker. I know he was very good in coverage for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Made 104 tackles, 3 tackles for loss, 3 passes defended, played in 15 games, allowed 2 touchdowns in coverage. It looks like he did not have a down year necessarily. I don't know why he was cut from the Steelers, but I think he could certainly be an option. I don't know how much money he's going to want, but I know that he could be an option. I like Jeff. I like Jack Campbell too. I think he's a good player, but again, linebacker is just one of those positions, kind of like running back, where I don't think it would be a bad pick. I don't think the player and the talent is necessarily a bad value. It's just I have this opinion where it's if you want to draft a running back, you want to draft a linebacker, you can get productive players at those positions at day 3 in the class. That's just how I look at it usually, and especially in this class where both positions are pretty deep. Poe is a player that I really like a lot as well. D. Winters and Charlie Thomas would be steals in the third. I agree. I think D. Winters would be a great pick. Van Ness has the size to play 3 tech. That's what I'm saying. That's where actually he played a lot last year, was at the 3 tech, because Iowa knew he was the best player on their defense, but they were pushing the upfield, so they kind of had to. So they put him on the field wherever they could find a spot for him, and he turned out to be the best pass rusher on the team. But if he played a normal amount of snaps, he would have been. He might have led the country in sacks. If you go day 2 or day 3, he falls. I like Saika Ika or Moro. I like Moro Ojoma a lot. I think Moro Ojoma is a very good player. Ika is a pretty athletic for nose. Yeah, but we don't really need a nose tackle. Like Aleem McNeil is our nose tackle. He's done very well the last 2 years. He's a little undersized, but extremely athletic and very good at it. Right. So I don't think we need a nose unless it's like too good of a value to pass up on. You're not looking for necessarily a nose tackle. You're looking for an interior pass rusher to play the 3 technique. Redmond out of Oklahoma looks good at the combine. I did not. I mean, I watched the combine, but I didn't really take too much stock in the combine, so I'm not entirely sure. I haven't watched any of Redmond, if that helps. Um, Vontae Mack, no matter what. Who is Vontae Mack? I don't know who that is. So I'm gonna be totally honest. I don't know if he's a linebacker, a D end, a D line. Like I do not know who that is. If that is his nickname, or if that is like just his full actual name. I have no idea who that is. So if you want to tell me where he went to school and what position he plays, I'll go take a look. But as of I genuinely don't know Vontae. Um, but yeah, just overall, the Lions have a lot of good things going. The Lions have good positions right now. I think if you look at the go watch. I got you. I was like trying to find, trying to I got. We needed 3 tech that can help in the run, who can also find success in interior pass rush. Exactly. That is exactly what we need. Is a 3 tech that can rush the passer and stop the run. I think that Tyree Wilson can do that. I think that Jalen Carter can do that. I think that Will Anderson, not so much, but I think if you draft Will Anderson, then you can kick Aiden Hutchinson and help him do that role as well when you really need it, which essentially would be adding a player to the 3 tech. Or I think Lucas Van Ness can do that very, very well as well. I've seen that this player out of Northwestern, whose name I will not attempt to butcher, is also very good and can play the 3 technique. I've heard that Tua Pelotu is really good and can play that role. There's a ton of options, and I think all of them would be good. But that is just at 6, right? We were talking about these 6 overall picks. If the options are there and you can't get any of the top 3 defensive players, being Wilson, Carter, or Anderson, I think that that I just totally blanked for a second. I think that Lucas Van Ness would be the best option, or you potentially wait till pick 18 and you get Tommy Adebawore. That is his name, the Northwestern edge rusher. Um, I asked Micro a similar question. Your thoughts on Holmes saving some cap for the midseason trade deadline in case we have injury players or the Lions have a run and want a player. I think that's a situation that you address if it comes up. I don't think you should save the money for something that might happen. And if it's a situation of, oh, well, we have injuries, I understand that it would essentially be a wasted season, but I don't know what player you would trade for that would save your season in the event of like your quarterback gets hurt or like Aiden Hutchinson gets hurt. Because I think the Lions have the depth at every position to be okay. Right? There's not a position that sticks out to me where it's like, oh, if we lose this player, we're completely done for it. Right? Maybe Tracy Walker at safety, but that's why you draft somebody. Jared Goff, if you lose your starting quarterback, you're not going to be able to trade for anybody that's going to save your season. So I don't know about that. As far as adding that final piece, again, that doesn't seem like a Brad Holmes type of move because he likes draft capital. He likes building through the draft. And that's what he's going to want to do. We saw last year he was a seller at the trade deadline and dealt TJ Hawkinson to the division rival Minnesota Vikings. I don't see him being a buyer at the deadline really ever. Because either you're up by a lot of games and you don't need a final piece because you're already like 6-1 or you've won 2 losses by the trade deadline, or you're 4-3 and there's like, oh, you could make that push, right? But you also could try to make a short-term investment that ends up not working anyway, and then you're stuck without your first-round pick or a top 50 pick because you tried to go all in and it didn't work, and that just doesn't seem like a risk Brad Holmes would take. So I don't see that situation really becoming a thing. So I wouldn't worry too much about it. And I don't think Brad Holmes would either. Would be a great pick. I haven't seen much about him, but I know a lot of people are incredibly high on him. 180 pounds and ran a 4.49. Dude is a freak. Athletic testing sounds very good. And versatile. I know Tui Pelosi played some interior. I think he slimmed down on weight to go to like a prime like sole edge rusher, which might be a mistake because I think his versatility was a big part of his game. But that is always an option as well. What else did you want to talk about? I mean, I just came here to talk about the free agents, talk about the moves that have been made. Kind of did that already, but I mean, just talk about the Lions in general. That's all I really want to do. Just want to talk some Lions football and talk about some potential ads, talk about some potential guys, talk about where they are right now. So we talked about some free agents. We talked about some drafting players at this point. Not a whole lot left to talk about. We could recycle back just to free agency before we get off. Probably go for about a few more minutes. We're about an hour 23 into the stream. I'll probably go to an hour and a half. But the Detroit Lions have $19 million left in cap. That does not include the Emmanuel Mosley deal, so that would be about $13.8 million, about 14 in total for the Detroit Lions to go make some moves. I think there's a couple guys out there. I think that you could go at a safety free agency. I think you could go add a linebacker in free agency like Miles Jack if he's cheap enough. Or I think the most realistic option is you go out and you get a receiver. Now, talking about any safeties you'd like to draft, I personally am a massive, massive fan of the safety from Illinois, Sidney Brown. I think Sidney Brown is arguably the best safety in the draft. Now, Brian Branch, I don't consider a safety. I consider Brian Branch a slot cornerback. I consider him a nickel defensive back who can play safety, but isn't really like his strong suit. I think playing him around the box in the slot is the most ideal situation for him. I'm not the biggest fan of Antonio Johnson. I won't lie. And I think that either Sidney Brown, Jordan, I have like 2 or 3 guys at safety. I love Sidney Brown. I love Jordan Battle. I really like LJ Skinner, and I love Jair Brown. Those are my 4 safeties that I really, really hope the Detroit Lions go out and get. I think Sidney Brown and Jordan Battle are a very much more of the traditional strong safety, go play around the box, go make plays type of guys who are not bad in coverage, have good instincts, have good ball skills. They both make big plays in big moments and are not afraid to hit. Again, Sidney Brown reminds me a ton of how Chloe Talanoa Hufanga, the player for USC who came out a few years ago and is now a Pro Bowler for the San Francisco 49ers. Jordan Battle, for me, reminds me a little bit of Jordan Elliott. Reminds me a little bit of, Jordan Elliott, who was here last year and was a really good box safety, and Deshaun Elliott. Why did I say Jordan Elliott? Deshaun Elliott, who was a really good safety last year, played down in the box, could play really any position you need him to play at safety. I think LJ Skinner, just his unique body type and his unique. We just got Glasgow back? Really? Did we actually? Hold on. This is like actual kind of breaking news. I want to see it. Former Broncos free agent guard Graham Glasgow, the Lions' third-round pick in 2016, is returning to Detroit on a one-year deal up to $4.5 million. That is a legit thing. I don't know why I would question you because you literally give me information all the time on Twitter or on Instagram, and I appreciate it a ton. That seems like a really, really good deal. Graham Glasgow, PFF. I just want to see what he did last year with the Broncos because not great, admittedly, not ideal, but a really good play. At least I remember him being a very good player in Detroit. I know he was here, sack, 0 sacks. You have 1 sack on 1,000 snaps. You have 3 sacks on 1,000 snaps. You have 3 sacks on 700. A little bit of a down year for sure, but I remember at least when he left, he was a very, very controversial player that a lot of people did not want to leave because he was decent. And I think for $4.5 million, you could probably slide him into your starting guard spot. And I believe he actually has center versatility as well, if I'm not mistaken. I believe Graham Glasgow played guard and safety, guard and center. I don't know what I'm talking about today. Somebody will have to let me know because I don't have the snaps like pulled up. This feels like a good move originally. I'll get back to you, Kool-Aid and Clumbert, I promise. But 1 year for 4.5 seems like a good deal. He's a starting quality offensive lineman for $4.5 million. Now, does this mean we cut Big V? Maybe. I really don't know what this means for the Detroit Lions offensive line, but I can tell you that Graham Glasgow, if he stays as depth, is a good depth piece. If he starts, has the potential to be a really good piece. I know the Denver Broncos offense in general last year just kind of was a train wreck under Nathaniel Hackett, so I won't take too much stock into it. But, 65. He seems like a very average tackle, and I will have to do a little bit more research. But just based off original opinion, based off kind of a gut reaction, this seems like a solid hire. What are your thoughts on Jalen Carter after his pro day? Concerning, but not necessarily out, I think is the best way to put it. Who's someone who seems overhyped in the draft? Ryan Brzee and Quentin Johnson are the most overhyped players in this draft, in my opinion. So Williams signed a 3-year, $12 million deal. I heard he wasn't really talking to the Lions. I heard he gave him a deadline. I've heard that too. I'm not entirely sure how legit that it is. I think the Lions want the better player. It's legit. Graham Glasgow back in Detroit. Nice. No worries. Stick to the breaking news. Yeah, I think, again, just a good move. A good move for the Detroit Lions. Some people are very happy. Some people are not very happy. Not a Commander. He's not a Bear either, which is solid. But I think Graham Glasgow probably going to be your Evan Brown replacement, right? Somebody that has guard to center versatility, somebody that is good, not great, somebody that has starter qualities, probably not superstar upside. I like the move. I think it adds offensive line depth. I think if anybody's going to make him into a great offensive line, it's going to be Hank Fairley. But like Nolan says, I wonder if the how to Levi. So if I actually just spent the perfect amount. We were talking about this about spending $4 to $5 million, and the Lions spent 4.5. Glad Graham Glasgow is a good depth piece. I agree. Yeah, Evan Brown. I don't think Evan Brown is coming back. I think Evan Brown will go be a starting center in the NFL, and I think that's a great deal for him. But I think this is your Graham. I think this is your Evan Brown replacement. And for $4 million a deal, $4 million a year, it's really not a bad option. They say what Glasgow cost by cutting Vitae, I think. Well, Graham Glasgow cost 5, 4.5 even. While cutting Big V would save you 6.5, but if you do it post June 1st, it saves you 9.5. So we'll see what happens. The Lions are pretty much out of money at this point, but it seems like an interesting option. Glasgow is great depth. If we move on from Vitae 2, then you can start a right guard. That's what I was thinking as well. Excuse me while I take just a quick water break. But this feels like a good move, especially if he's remaining solely as a depth piece. Now the Lions are 6 deep at offensive line, like 6 starters deep at offensive line, and really have the opportunity, I think, to do a lot of unique things with their offensive line, who, by the way, is already top 2 in the NFL. Technically 6.6 because of dead cap, 6.5 for what the Vitae move. I mean, not really, because it's a $12 million contract. You're paying him 3 in dead, but you're freeing up that 9 of the 12. So that's technically how it works. That dead cap does not cut into cap savings. You're getting $9.5, $9.5 million back, but you are paying 3 of the 12. That is how it works. So you would be getting 12.5 back, or you would be getting 9.5 of your 12.5 back in free space. But I know that's confusing because I've been confused about that in the past. So I just wanted to explain that, make sure that everything was going correctly. Who cares about March Madness right now? The Lions just made a move. Welcome home. That's right. I like it. I like the pick. I'm actually a very big fan. Not a whole lot else actually being said right now. I 15-2 would be lit. That would be cool, but I doubt it's gonna happen. So the Lions signed Graham Glasgow. He is probably not the newest starter, but he is the newest member of the Detroit Lions. And I think this sums it up pretty good. Beef up the whole line. Glasgow started for 4 seasons in Detroit, started at center as well as a left and right guard. Last season, he had the third most penalties and allowed the third most sacks in the NFL, though that may be due to the fact that Denver had the most O-line combos. Yeah, I think that sums it up pretty good. You have a guy that has starting experience for $4.5 million now, who you probably would have had to pay Evan Brown more than that. So getting the player that has starting experience is pretty solid in my opinion for $4.5 million. That's not too expensive. So post June 1st cut for Vitae would create $5 in additional cap space after the. Yes, correct. I believe that is how that would work. Because you get 9.5. The Lions just spent 4.5. So subtract 9.5 from 4.5. You get $5 million addition to the Detroit Lions if they were to cut Vitae, but they would also essentially get Graham Glasgow for free, is how that would work. Ideally, he's not a center, or ideally, he's not a starter. I would still rather have Vitae start over Graham Glasgow. In the Lions really don't need to cut him, right? The Lions do have enough cap space to make this work without releasing Big V. And if there were a Big V would potentially take a pay cut, I think that they could potentially even still restructure guys like Goff or Decker or Ragnow or even Okwara and free up more dollars. But at this point, right, you're sliding in Graham Glasgow, who probably shouldn't be a starter after giving up the most sacks in the NFL. But also the whole problem with that is Russell Wilson is very unpredictable. He likes to scramble, he likes to move in the pocket, and sometimes he just makes horrible, horrible decisions. As he said in on the tweet, right, they had uh, the most combinations in the offensive line, which means the chemistry wasn't always there. Sometimes sacks are accredited to a person when it's not necessarily their fault. So I will go watch Graham Glasgow and give a better idea of what we're dealing with. But for the moment, this seems like a solid B type of deal, right? A backup, but a starting quality backup for not too much money. It's money that the Lions didn't have to free up; they already had available. So I like it. I think it's a good, solid deal. I mean, you could always draft an offensive center. You could always draft Osiris Torrance, and Glasgow is the cheaper Evan Brown replacement. You could do that. I thought he was restructuring Big V, and I believe we will cut Okwara to add more to our cap space. Let's go get Bobby. I would not go get Bobby Wagner. I would not get Bobby Wagner, and I would much rather get Miles Jack or just draft somebody than get Bobby Wagner. I don't think Bobby Wagner is worth the money, nor is he really going to get better. That is just my opinion on Bobby Wagner. I am not a fan, but we could always get Osiris Torrance. But honestly, at this point, I probably wouldn't. The Lions' offensive line now consists of 6 starting quality players, and Matt Nelson is the 7th, who technically did start last season for a number of games and played really well as a good run blocker. So you're talking about the best offensive line now got a starting quality player as their 6th offensive lineman and a player with starting reps as your 7th offensive line. Very, very interesting. I just want to see what some people are hoping about. Wholly underpay Lions winning the North. I think it's a good value. I don't understand everybody's obsession with Bobby Wagner personally. I'm not a big fan. Out of left field. It is a little left field. I was not expecting that to be the case. Interesting. Interesting. And plus, you have the best offensive line coach in the NFL is a Detroit Lion. Would you cut Stenberg at this point? Yeah, at this point I would because we can go to the Detroit Lions depth chart. And obviously they're not going to have Graham Glasgow, but the rest of the offensive line will be accurate. So you have actually they even have David Montgomery here already, which is pretty helpful. But you have obviously Taylor Decker, Jonah Jackson, Frank Ragnow, and Penei Sewell. Those guys are staying. Those guys are not going anywhere. Halapaloe Vaitai is, I think, a good player to keep around. You could cut him, but you also don't have to cut him. If he's healthy, if he's bouncing back from the back surgery, if he looks healthy to go, I would keep him because he was really good in 2021. He's a great run blocker and didn't allow a sack in 2021 despite playing almost 1,000 snaps. Now, you have Logan Stenberg, and Matt Nelson is going to basically be your backup tackle to Taylor Decker and Penei Sewell. He is not a starter, but he does have starting experience. And when he has been thrown in the fire, I think he has stepped up and played relatively well. Not to the point where he would be a full-time starting tackle in the NFL, but to the point where it's like, oh, if Taylor Decker or Penei Sewell, God forbid, miss a game, you would be right. You could throw in Matt Nelson and he would survive. You also have a big Z who is a high upside UDFA. But then you have Logan Stenberg, and you have Ross Pischenbacher, who did get re-signed, and Graham Glasgow. Now, Graham Glasgow can back up to Jonah Jackson, Frank Ragnow, and Halapaloe Vaitai. it essentially played the same role that Evan Brown played last year. So with that being said, I would probably get rid of Dan Skipper or Keanu Awasika before I get rid of Logan Stenberg. I would probably cut the third right guard, move Logan Stenberg back to the third string guard on both sides of the line, and then plug in, obviously, Graham Glasgow at the backup right guard, center, or left guard position. That would be my opinion, but Logan Stenberg also had some ups and downs last year, and the Lions could just not be willing to bring him back. Bobby Wagner is good, but also peaked. You're not getting the best Bobby Wagner. You're getting 32-year-old Bobby Wagner. Yeah, exactly. You're getting a Bobby Wagner that is slower, who's not as good in the open space, is not as good of a tackler, is still incredibly smart, still made some plays last year for the Rams, but really took a significant step back physically, which concerns me. And you're probably not going to get even better production than what Alex Anzalone would give you. And Alex Anzalone knows the system better and is more just athletically gifted now in the open field. I would not sign Bobby Wagner. He'd be way too expensive and just would not be getting better. Might even make the defense worse. Our lads depth chart is up to date too. Yeah, I mean the ESPN one is right now. It has David Montgomery. It has, I'm assuming if you go down to your starters, it'll have, Cameron Sutton and Emmanuel Mosley as your cornerbacks. Although, oh, Jeff Okudah's right there. He's questionable. I was like, Jeff Okudah's not there. But I mean, you're up to date, and I think that's how the offensive line would shake out. I think you cut Keanu Awaski, then you slide Stenberg back, you slide Pischenbacher back, and then you just get rid of Dan Skipper there, and then you have Graham Glasgow take these three interior positions as the backup for anybody that gets hurt, which knowing us is probably going to happen. Who do we get to help our linebacker room? I believe that's our biggest need. Honestly, I don't think linebacker is that big of a need. Like, you can survive at linebacker with average players. The Lions have that. They have average players. Malcolm Rodriguez is good. Alex Anzalone is good. Derek Barnes is good. James Houston plays edge, so I don't know why he's at Sam linebacker. And Anthony Pittman is also very good. I would draft one or two more players, right? I would, because the Lions only carried 5 last year. They have 4 on the roster right now. I would just draft one more, maybe Overshown from Texas or Ivan Pace from Cincinnati, or pick linebacker in the draft. D Winners in the 6th round. Like, whoever it is, you can get your last linebacker in the 6th round, and you can go into the season with Anzalone, Rodriguez, Derek Barnes as your 3. Get a specialist linebacker, whether it's a coverage specialist or a run stopping specialist or just a bigger linebacker, whatever body type you want to draft, and you'll be fine. You'll have the same linebacking core as last year, essentially, and the linebacking core last year was good for the most part. So I mean, I wouldn't spend a cent more on linebacker until the draft. Last guy contract would be incentives based, have a low cap hit, 4.5. That is true. It did say up to 4.5, didn't it? Worth up to 4.5. I would assume, like you said, he is going to be incentives based because he did have a very down year last year. So maybe they have a little bit more money. I would assume that you probably still don't go a whole lot further in free agency because now you have the $6 million and the 4.5, up to 4.5 for Graham Glasgow. That's about $10 million roughly, right? That leaves you at 9. That's about just enough for your um, draft class. So I would assume we're almost done in free agency for now. I could always be wrong. They could cut Vaitai in 5 minutes, and then they could restructure Okwara, and we could free up another 10 or $12 million. But I would assume, as of right now, not assuming that more contract negotiations to come, not assuming more cuts are going to happen. Brad Holmes is pretty happy. I think the Detroit Lions going into the draft are a talented team that don't have too much more to worry about. Right? Your quarterback is good. Obviously, you want to draft a quarterback. Your running backs are solid. I would maybe draft one. Your wide receivers are good, but again, I might draft one to replace DJ Chark if he doesn't come back. Your tight ends are good. You have a good fullback. You have a top five, top two, maybe even best offensive line in the NFL, but shh, don't tell anybody. You have Aiden Hutchinson, Isaiah Buggs, Aleem McNeil, John Kaminsky's a starter, and then you have Romeo Quara, Charles Harris, Josh Pascal to back them up. And then, of course, you have Benito Jones and Levi Onwuzurike and Julian Okwara if they're all healthy. If the option arises to draft a top defensive lineman, I would add him to this defensive line core, but it's not necessary. Linebacker, I would take DeMarvion Overshown from Texas in the third or fourth and fill out the linebacking core. As far as cornerbacks, I think Cameron Sutton and Emmanuel Mosley will start. I think Okuda should start in the slot or potentially slide over to safety on certain packages. As far as safety, Tracy, Kirby, and Italy, obviously it says that they're all strong safety, but Kirby Joseph is really a free safety. So is Ifeatu Melifonwu. And I do view Brady Breeze as more of a strong safety type role. But you have five safeties, all of which have been okay, pretty good. And then your cornerbacks, you bring back Will Harris, you bring back Chase Lucas, who was good in the preseason. You bring back Okuda, Mosley, Sutton, and Jacobs, who are four solid. So you go in and just, I'm not even going to go through a mock draft, but let's say you get Tyree Wilson for the interior. You get Joey Porter at 18 for the secondary. You get Sidney Brown as a safety, or even Jordan Battle as a safety in this first second round pick. Then you go get a wide receiver with your second. You go get a backup quarterback with your third round pick if you feel like it's worth it, or you go get linebacker with DeMarvin Overshow with your third round pick, and then fourth round pick you go with DTR or Aiden O'Connell, and you're filling out this roster completely for a position to go succeed. The Lions are in a good position right now. The Lions are in a very good position. Crazy good feeling that the sixth round pick is good enough to play your starting role linebacker. Yes, it is. It is a good feeling because Brad Holmes knows what he's doing. Brad Holmes has done his homework, and it's a good feeling to have a GM that is very good at his job. I assume we were done with big signings unless we move. I would assume so too. Like I said, I wouldn't assume that I wouldn't project more cuts or roster moves, but you never know. Brad Holmes is third, and we technically probably should be at a cap space now, but he's just moving money around. Badgley's a free agent. Maybe we do sign a kicker. I think that we do need to get that. Kicker probably is an option in the draft as well. Cue the Kronk meme. Oh yeah, it's all. I can't do the Kronk voice. So I went to try it and I realized I can't do it. I didn't know what you're talking about. Evan Brown to Seattle. That seems like a good move. Seattle needs some offensive line help, especially on the interior. Evan Brown is a good player. I wonder how much he's getting. If he's cheaper than Evan Brown, then that would be sweet. The contract is worth up to 4.5. It's likely incentives based, closer to 1 to 2 million a year. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. So if you're talking about a $1 million deal, that still leaves you with probably $3-4 million to go make a move potentially. So that could also be very exciting. We might not quite be done. I think $3-4 million is enough for a kicker. Maybe a backup quarterback if they really like somebody. I mean, go out sign Drew Lock for $1 million and go out and get Mike Badgley for $1 million and call it a re-signing, call it a free agency, and wait till April for the draft. Those are both options, but I do want to see Evan Brown contract because I want to know if they paid Evan Brown more or less than Graham Glasgow. I'm sure it'll pop up in just a moment, but I'm not entirely sure. So Evan Brown, it just says agreed to terms. So we'll stay for a little bit. Yeah, I just found the tweet as well. Jeremy Fowler tweeted it, undisclosed specifics. Yeah, I want to wait. We'll wait and see just a little bit to see, but I would assume he's going to year, 4.5. And with the incentives base, I would assume this is a significantly cheaper contract than what um, what Evan Brown is going to do. Cooper Rush may be a good fit. I don't disagree, but I think Cooper Rush is going to ask for like upper echelon backup quarterback, like $4 or $5 million, which yeah, it would be fine. But I don't think Cooper Rush does a whole lot like win football games. So I'm not think right. He doesn't do anything to lose football games. Just skill. It would really depend on the like most free agents. It would really depend on the price, but we will we will see. I'm a little surprised that the Lions addressed offensive line. I really am. I was not against drafting an offensive lineman. But yeah, I think it's kind of funny that they didn't just use a Lions pick. That would make sense too. But I guess he is Denver to Detroit now, so it does make sense. A lot of people are like nostalgic to bring all the players. Oh, what? Acting up again. Okay, one moment. I feel like addressing the guard position makes sense for the Detroit Lions because you were thinking about drafting a guy probably in the mid rounds, or you're thinking about Osiris Torrance from Florida. You're thinking about the offensive guard from TCU. Like there were definitely options at the right guard position, but for an incentives based contract for a guy that has starting experience and has the versatility to go play center and guard at each guard position, it makes a lot of sense for the Detroit Lions. So the nostalgia thing is obviously like, oh, like we got one of our former draft picks back, we got one of our former players, but grading him as an outside player, grading him as a player who doesn't have association with the Detroit Lions, I still think this is a solid like B minus pickup, right? Because I think it's a little bit expensive for a backup guard, but you're getting a backup guard with starting upside who's cheaper than your starting right guard and could potentially overtake him if the salary numbers make enough sense and you're confident enough in him. But also with the injury history of Jackson's missed games and Ragnow's been hurt the last couple of years. Big V's future is uncertain. I think it makes a lot of sense to go out and get a quality guard. Might not be the best, but is going to give you some quality. I really want to know what happened to Evan Brown. I really, really want to know what happens to Evan Brown because Evan Brown was a player that I really liked. He was a really good center, but we'll wait and see. We'll go for about 8 more minutes. I know I said I'd get off in an hour 30, but now we're 7 minutes to 2 hours, and we might as well just finish out the 2 hour stream, right? Um, Says he's not a backup if they plan to cut Big. That's true, but we don't know if they're planning to cut Big V. I'm not going to project it because the last time Big V was around, he was really good. He was one of the best offensive linemen on the Detroit Lions, and he allowed 0 sacks and 1,000 snaps. So I wouldn't kick Big V out immediately because he's a great player, and him and Penny still have so much good chemistry together, and they're both good run blockers, and just both of them are really, really good. So, I think it all depends on what the moves are next. We'll probably know within the next hour what they plan to do with Vaitai. If he's not cut by the end of the day, I would assume he's going to stay. If he's not cut by the time like Graham Glasgow gets his physical and everything figured out, assuming he passes all of that, I would assume Big V's here to stay for the offseason. If he is cut, then the Lions get $9.5 million back, probably because they'll designate it as a post June 1st cut. You'll be good to go. So we're gonna have to wait and see. Initial thoughts are a B minus signing. Initial thoughts are a B minus signing. Overall, Tyree Wilson at 6, Jalen Carter at 18, Better for you, or is it still too much villain for your fanhood? That would be something. But yeah, so we have a few minutes left. Speaking of grading free agency, I think we can go through and do that right now. I'll go through and just grade all of the picks while we end out the stream. Cameron Sutton, I gave an A minus as the original pick. Emmanuel Mosley, I give a B because I think he's injury prone and a little expensive, but if he's healthy, he's really good. David Montgomery, I give a B plus. Again, you're paying more money, but you're getting a significantly better running back than what Jamal Williams was. You have Isaiah Buggs, who I think is a B. Craig Reynolds, who I think is a C. Alex Anzalone, I give a B minus. Matt Nelson, I give a C because he's just depth. Will Harris, I give probably a C minus. I think is the worst move so far. And John Kaminsky, I give an A minus. I think the Lions are doing really good things in free agency, and then the Graham Glasgow, I also give a B minus. I'd put them right around a solid B for free agency right now, which for a team that was half a game from making the playoffs, you don't need to ace free agency, but the Lions have gotten better over the last couple of days. We have a Pelicans fan in here. He says, Detroit Lions, thank you for Jamal Williams. I think he is the steal of free agency. I think you got a good player for sure. I think you got a good player for a good value, and I think him and Alvin Kamara should be a pretty good backfield duo. So, with all that being said, though, that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you all so very much for watching. Let me know down in the comments below if you're watching this as a video what you think about the free agent signing so far. I'd be very curious what you guys think. But with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you all so much for watching, and until next time, and as always, go Lions.